So David said, I'll make my capital in a city that doesn't belong to the northern or to the southern kingdoms. And so David set his sights on the city of Jerusalem, which was situated between the two halves of his kingdom. But the thing was that at that time, Jerusalem was the home for a whole other tribe known as the Jebusites, who really didn't want to have anything to do with David or his kingdom. At first, the Jebusites there in Jerusalem didn't think they had anything to worry about. After all, they were in a walled city set up high on top of a hill. They figured they didn't even really need an army to hold off David and his troops. In fact, they taunted David by saying that the blind and the lame people in their city by themselves would be able to hold David off. But eventually, David's troops sneaked into Jerusalem through the pipeline that carried water into the city, and they took control of Jerusalem. And as revenge for what the Jebusites had said to him, David ordered his troops to go throughout Jerusalem and to kill all of the blind and lame people. After reading this story, many people across the years have wondered, why is this story so short? After all, for 21 chapters in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, the plot has been building. For 21 chapters, the drama has been building to that day when David would finally rule as king over all the tribes of the land. And now it's happened, but after 21 chapters of build-up, the whole climax is described in a mere 10 verses. I believe the reason this story is so short is because the Hebrew people considered it to be an embarrassment. Yes, it's the story about how David, their greatest king, came to the throne. And yes, it's the story about how Jerusalem became their capital city. But at the same time, I believe that in telling this story, the Hebrew people realized that this was an example of their history, of how they had failed to fully live up to the vision that God had for them. After all, here in this story, Jerusalem becomes their capital city when David uses his military might and steals it away from the people who it rightfully belonged to. And here in this story, one of the very first things that their new king did was he ordered the execution of all the disabled people in the city. Is that a history to be proud of? No, the Hebrew people knew that it was an example of how in their history they had failed to live up to the vision that God had for them. It was an example of how in their history they had failed to treat other people fairly and justly. They knew that it was an example of how in their history they had mistreated and abused other people simply because they could. But we need to realize that those same kinds of stories are there in our history as well. For instance, we shake our heads at what the Nazis did in Germany. We shake our heads at the way they attempted to create a master race by eliminating all of the undesirables from their society. And that list of undesirables included not just the Jews, but also the gypsies and the mentally disabled. And especially when it came to the mentally disabled, those who were not outright killed were sterilized. In other words, the Nazis wanted to make sure that those kinds of people did not have children of their own, so that eventually the undesirables in their society would die out. And the Nazis did that to at least 350,000 mentally disabled people. But did you know that that very same kind of thing happened right here in the United States? During the first half of the 20th century, at least 32 states had laws that required that certain kinds of people be sterilized, such as the mentally ill, the disabled, alcoholics, and other kinds of people that the different states wanted to make sure that their genes did not live on. And it took quite a few decades before people were finally willing to speak up. Quite a few decades before people were finally willing to take a stand and say that what was going on wasn't right. Consider this rather well-known quote from Martin Niemöller, a church leader in Germany at the time when the Nazis rose to power. He said, "In Germany, they came first for the communists. But I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews. But I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists. But I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics. But I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me. But by that time, there was no one left to speak up." We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, that they are endowed by God with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the vision that we say that we have for this nation. And it's a good vision. It's a great vision. But if we are to achieve that vision, then we need to make sure that equality and rights are not just blessings that we get to enjoy, or that only people just like us get to enjoy. No, if we are to achieve that vision, then we need to make sure that equality and rights are blessings that everyone gets to enjoy. After all, we hold these truths to be self-evident. With God's help, let us be the nation that God has called us to be. Let us pray. Almighty God, give us a vision of the purpose that you have for us as a nation, and fill us with your love and your power, so that